Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Hunter, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to another session at the Fall NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I am now pleased to present this session, which will cover the Directorate for Geosciences. This session will be presented by Cynthia Suchman, who is the Program Director in the Division of Ocean Sciences.
Thank you, Samantha. Welcome, everyone. This is an overview of NSF's Directorate for Geosciences, or GEO. My name is Cynthia Suchman, and I'm a Program Director in the GEO Division of Ocean Sciences Biological Oceanography Program. Today, I plan to first talk about the structure of GEO, including our divisions and programs. This will give you a good sense of the scope of what we support. Then I'll describe some key cross NSF programs that geoscientists should be aware of, with a particular focus on those for early career investigators. And then finally, I'll describe some integrative or cross-GEO opportunities with an emphasis on training and broadening participation in geosciences. So to begin, with an overview of geostructure, we are one of 8 directorates at NSF supporting the STEM enterprise. And our mission is to fund the development of knowledge and technological innovations to understand and adapt to the changes in our Earth, ocean, and atmosphere, accelerate the societal benefits of our investments, and train a diverse and inclusive geosciences workforce. The kind of work we support is research in all fields of the geosciences, and also that includes polar research. We support integration of research and education in geosciences, and we support infrastructure, instrumentation, and facilities. So I did want to say that in addition to a lot of the research programs and the research efforts that we support, there is a lot of infrastructure and facilities that is a large portion of the GEO budget. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of that. That includes things like the U.S. academic research fleet, which focuses on ocean research, polar research stations on both Antarctica and on Greenland, aircraft for atmospheric research, that sort of thing. And, I just mentioned that again because I'm going to focus more on scientific opportunities, but GEO is also very heavily invested in science support for our funded research. So the Directorate of Geosciences contains 3 divisions: Earth Sciences, or EAR, Ocean Sciences, or OCE, and Atmospheric and Geospace Sciences, or AGS. We also include the Office of Polar Programs, or OPP, and RISE, or Research, Innovation, Synergies, and Education, which is a cross-GEO integration component of geosciences. So the Division of Atmospheric and Geospace Sciences, or AGS, supports fundamental research, physical, chemical, and biological, that impacts the composition, phenomena, and behavior between the sun and the Earth. These processes include space weather events, tropospheric weather events, past and present climate, and air quality. AGS also supports large, complex facilities required for research in the atmospheric and solar terrestrial sciences, including the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR. The AGS has 3 sections, and this is atmospheric section, geospace section, and the NCAR facility section. I did want to mention, just in general, for investigators that are interested in submitting proposals to NSF, the points of contact are generally going to be at the program level. Or, in other words, one important thing to determine in advance of submitting a proposal to NSF is which program is the best fit. So that's one reason that I want to drill down and talk about the actual programs in geosciences. So as part of the atmospheric section, we have atmospheric chemistry, climate and large-scale dynamics, paleoclimate, physical and dynamic meteorology. As part of the geospace section, there's aeronomy, geospace facilities, magnetospheric physics, which I am not a magnetospheric physicist, solar, terrestrial, and space weather programs. There is also, as I said, the NCAR facilities section, which encompasses not just NCAR, but education and diversity programs in AGS, and also observing and laboratory facilities available to all investigators. The Division of Earth Sciences is interested in the structure, composition, and evolution of the Earth, which includes processes from the tree canopy through soils, the crust, mantle, and core. EAR supports fieldwork, theoretical and computational work, experiments large and small, and infrastructure. The programs in Earth Sciences are divided between two sections: disciplinary programs, which encompasses geobiology and low temperature geochemistry, geomorphology and land use dynamics, geophysics, hydrologic sciences, petrology and geochemistry, sedimentary geology and paleobiology, and the tectonics program. There's also an integrated activities section, which includes education and human resources, instrumentation and facilities, frontier research in earth sciences, cooperative studies of the Earth's deep interior, the postdoctoral fellowship program in EAR, geoinformatics, and other cost-cutting multidisciplinary programs related to geohazards and climate. The Division of Ocean Sciences, or OCE, supports research on global oceans and their interactions with the Earth and atmosphere. OCE supports major shared use oceanographic facilities, which includes research vessels, submersibles, and ocean observatories. Ocean Sciences is divided into three sections: the Ocean section, which is the biological and physical oceanography programs; Marine Geosciences section, which is chemical oceanography and marine geology and geophysics; and an integrative program section, which encompasses ocean drilling, ocean education, which also includes a postdoctoral fellowship program, Ocean Observatories Initiative, Oceanographic Instrumentation and Technical Service, Oceanographic Technology and Interdisciplinary Coordination, Ship and Submersible Support, and Ship Operations. The Office of Polar Programs, or OPP, supports research and educational initiatives in all scientific fields relevant to the study of and in Antarctica and the Arctic. It provides logistical and operational support for work in Antarctica and in remote locations across the Arctic. There are three sections that include research programs in OPP. The Antarctic Research Program section, which has programs in oceans and atmospheric sciences, glaciology, earth sciences, organisms and ecosystems, astrophysics, and geospace. The Arctic Research Programs section is not disciplinary organized, but it has a program in natural sciences and a program that is more focused on system science understanding, an Arctic Observing Network, and an Arctic Social Sciences program, which means social sciences are part of GEO through the Office of Polar Programs. Arctic research also includes research coordination and policy support. And then there's a section that encompasses programs that span both poles, that is polar cyber infrastructure, data and sample reuse, polar education and outreach, and a postdoctoral fellowship program in OPP. So next I want to highlight some solicitations that are going to be of interest to all geoscientists that are NSF-wide and are of particular interest to folks at the early career stage. Everyone should be aware of and encourage your students to apply for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, which is due in October every year. And I want to also point out this solicitation number in blue, NSF 22-614. I'm going to talk a lot about solicitations. Some solicitations update every year, others do not. You want to look for the most recent one to understand exactly what is required to apply. So the GRFP is one, or the Graduate Research Fellowship Program is one for graduate students. Another one that's of interest to early career researchers, and I'm very pleased to see that all parts of GEO have a postdoctoral fellowship program right now. So the deadline or target date will vary across the different divisions and offices within GEO, and you can see that there are different solicitations for each one. AGS, or an Atmospheric and Geospace Sciences, doesn't have a deadline. The others have a target date or a deadline. Again, look for any updates and a more recent coming for solicitations, but the most recent one is to look at. Some other opportunities that are NSF-wide of particular interest to geoscientists is the career program, or the Faculty Early Career Development Program. This is for faculty that are at the assistant professor or equivalent level. Again, there's an annual deadline in July. The solicitation is regularly updated. Details are available there. But it supports early career faculty who have the potential to serve as academic role models. It integrates education and research as a key component of this. These are 5-year awards, a substantial investment, and highly prestigious. And I will say that, as with many programs, this is one where I encourage you to contact the disciplinary program officers to find out how career proposals will be reviewed, and get any advice they have, because the practices will vary somewhat across different parts of NSF. And so you may get some very specific advice that would differ from what's in the general solicitation if you contact a program officer. Another one I wanted to highlight was a relatively new mid-career advancement opportunity, which is for associate professor level faculty. Again, those most recent solicitation numbers here, 22603. There's a February target date. It is a solicitation specifically designed to provide protected time and resources and training to establish scientists and engineers, again, targeted at the mid-career level. Associate professor rank, I think, is what is required. So it's very different in that sense from the career solicitation, which is pre-tenure. Again, contact the specific program that you have interest in. These, I believe, are reviewed within disciplinary programs. Now I wanted to highlight a couple of things, special solicitations available through RISE, through the GEO RISE. These are both due, I believe, for new solicitations, so keep your eye out. But the first one is the Pathways into Earth, Ocean, Polar, and Atmospheric and Geospace Sciences, or GeoPaths. It's a program designed to promote awareness about careers in the geosciences. There's no due date for this one at this point, so it can, I believe the solicitation indicates you can submit proposals at any time. I would check on that to be sure. GeoPaths projects are expected to use evidence-based strategies to improve student engagement, support, and retention. They also should expose students to meaningful experiences in the geosciences. There are 3 tracks in this solicitation. The solicitation itself will have a lot more detail than this, but the informal networks track, or geosciences learning and experiences in informal settings for teachers, pre-college, upper level high school students, and early undergraduates. The second track is the undergraduate preparation, or UP track, which engages pre-college and undergraduate students in extracurricular experiences and training with a focus on service learning and workplace skill building. And the third track is a graduate opportunities, or GO track, which will improve research and career-related pathways into the geosciences for undergraduate and graduate students through institutional collaborations with a focus on service learning and workplace skill building. And the second RISE opportunity I wanted to highlight is relatively new, the cultural transformation in the geosciences community, or CTGC. Again, NSF 22562. There may be a new solicitation coming, so keep an eye out. The goals of this program are to foster a just, equitable, and inclusive geosciences research community that reflects the diversity of the United States and develop a workforce with the skills required to understand how the Earth system can continue to sustain society. It involves planning grants, which are intended to build capacity and nurture future CTGC projects. And they can be used to support team formation activities, develop and nurture relationships with potential partners, access specialized frameworks or resources needed to develop an implementation project proposal, or organize catalytic activities, things like workshops and conferences. Implementation projects, which require a letter of intent, should demonstrate support for marginalized or minoritized groups to promote career advancement and or expertise in training the next generation of geoscientists in community-based research, participatory research, or place-based research. These need to demonstrate established, inclusive, and safe research environments and demonstrate established, authentic, mutually beneficial partnerships with local communities or other collaborators. So this is a program that builds on a lot of prior NSF efforts, things like Gold Program or Advance or NSF Includes, that lead to environments that foster inclusion and belonging. And in this slide, I put it in here mostly to highlight that there are a huge number of cross-directorate activities, cross-divisional activities, and cross-program activities at NSF that are independent but make use of program disciplinary expertise. And this is just one example. It is a follow-on to the P2C2 program. This one is called Paleo Perspectives on Present and Projected Climate, or P4 Climate. It's a cross-GEO program that supports interdisciplinary research, utilizing observational and modeling studies to provide paleo perspectives addressing two research themes. The first being past regional and seasonal climate, and the second is past climate forcing sensitivity and feedbacks. So next, I wanted to do a brief overview of the merit review process. This is covered in much greater detail, was earlier in the week's sessions, but it's pretty important from my perspective that everyone understand how NSF's proposals are reviewed and some of the commonalities and merit review criteria across NSF. So anyone writing a proposal to NSF needs to be paying attention to these things. The main take-home point of this slide is, what happens once a proposal gets submitted to NSF? Our process is a combination of ad hoc and panel review. And following that, a program officer makes a recommendation. The division director of that division will concur that recommendation. And if it's an award, it'll go to the Division of Grants and Agreements for processing. That whole process to the division director concurrence is about 6 months, give or take. But the main thing is that all NSF proposals undergo peer review, or most of them do, that involve either ad hoc or panel review or both. And it's really important if you're writing a proposal to understand how it's going to be reviewed, and it may vary across programs. The program that I'm in, biological oceanography, we use a combination. We do ad hoc and panel review. Some programs do only ad hoc. Some programs do only panel. The other thing to keep in mind in the review process is, in common to NSF, every proposal is reviewed on its intellectual merit and its broader impacts, in addition to any special review criteria that might be in that solicitation. Again, it's going to vary across NSF exactly how the review process is completed, ad hoc versus panel. Talk to your program officer, which is kind of my standard answer to any question. And I wanted to provide a few tips on things to think about when you're crafting proposals or you're advising people on how to think about writing an NSF proposal. the first here are just common mistakes, things that we see that we would advise that you try to avoid doing. The first is that work is too close to what's been done before. It's potentially seen as an incremental advance. The second would be that the techniques or the methods aren't seen as cutting edge. And this third one is very common, that projects have too large a scope, are seen as overambitious, trying to do too much, trying to do everything in a field all at once. A program rather than a project is one thing that we tend to see. Or on the other side, it might be so narrowly focused that reviewers aren't going to find it exciting. Another common problem is that the proposed plan for the research, it's unclear how that's going to connect back to address the stated goals of the project. So I want to build on a couple of those just by saying, one thing that we see a bunch is that it's not entirely clear to readers how results are going to advance fundamental understanding in the field. This gets at the question of an incremental advance. Rather than justifying our project as creating new data, doing particular activities, it's really good idea to think about how you can convey how it fits in the broader context of your field. That is a pretty common stumbling block and one that really requires some attention. Something else that we see a lot is just comments that a proposal doesn't have enough detail in certain aspects. You can't assume that reviewers are going to be able to fill in the blanks. One example of that might be citing work that's in preparation without actually providing figures to show what that is. Reviewers will get frustrated by that because they can't actually see what those data are, what those methods are. So please be sure to include those in your project description. And then finally, just to emphasize this last point again about addressing stated goals, it's really important to connect, what your research questions are, the data that will be collected, how those data are going to be analyzed, and how that analysis is going to link back to address your primary questions and hypotheses. Sometimes some of those connections are not super clear. And this slide is just some best practices or things to think about that are useful to do well. Start with a compelling introduction. And make sure you convey the significance of your project. That gets back into convey the importance to the field of what is this work going to add. And it's often useful to explain with detail where your samples are coming from, provide a map. Again, make sure you're as specific as possible. Don't leave reviewers having to guess what you're trying to do. It's helpful to lay out a clear work plan and a timeline for that work plan. It's very useful to explain the roles of all the personnel involved and to come up with a realistic budget. It's also very important, and this may be too obvious, to comply with all the requirements, the NSF proposal guide or the solicitation. You want to make sure that the proposal has its best chance of getting reviewed to start with. One thing that can be very handy is to contact a program officer when you're first conceiving of a project to make sure that it's fitting the solicitation or the program that you're targeting. That's part of our job, is to provide that kind of feedback, fit to program. And we can't tell you how to write a proposal, but we can tell you if we think that if it fits in our program. Something else that's useful to do is to suggest reviewers that are not conflicted with you. For those of us who do ad hoc review, that can help you get the best review of your proposal. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about intellectual merit, which is one of the NSF review criteria that is the community seems to have a very good handle on how to review and what is expected. However, we get a lot of questions about what makes good broader impacts, or what is the broader impact. So I wanted to spend some time with this slide. How do you incorporate broader impacts into a proposal, the aspect of NSF proposals that clarify how the work is going to benefit society? And just some general pieces of advice. Don't treat broader impacts as a checklist, meaning that you have to try to do everything. That is not going to serve you well. It's probably not going to have a high impact. So choose what you want to do in your proposal that would fall under a broader impact, what you might have institutional resources or collaboration set up to do, what fits with your interests, what fits with your project. These are all really important considerations. There's also not one thing that is a broader impact. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to train a graduate student to have strong broader impacts. I think that's somewhat of a myth that reviewers see as well. It can be any one or any combination of these things. Don't try to do them all. But teaching, training, and learning is a very common one. And anything from graduate students, undergraduate, postdoctoral students, sometimes even high school students. You can broaden participation of underrepresented groups as a broader impact. You can build or enhance partnerships, either internationally or with other agencies, but I would like to put an asterisk next to that and say, if you are thinking about international or federal collaborations, make sure you follow the PAPG guidelines on funding for those things and talk to your program officer before assuming you can include anything in your budget for them. But in general, building and enhancing partnerships can strengthen proposals. You can disseminate your scientific results broadly. Add scientific understanding or technological understanding. You can enhance infrastructure, meaning add to the laboratory capability or equipment at your university. You can work in developing countries. You can also have local impacts, which means you can work on policy or management or conservation with partners that have that as their primary goal. As I said, it's best to choose a few activities, 1-2 activities, focus on them and do them well and be complete. Explain what you're going to do in your proposal. We often see comments that there's not a lot of detail on some of the broader impacts, so make sure that they're fully explained. And feel free to include them in your budget as appropriate. I would say also be sure to look at the review criteria for broader impacts, because reviewers will also have to understand how you're going to assess success. We're starting to see more and more comments about this in reviews, so think about that. So one of the sad realities of my job and all of my program officer colleagues is that we need to decline far more proposals than we can award. So if you as a PI are declined, recognize that it happens to everyone. It's very common. It's not a great thing to do from our perspective, and it's not a great news to hear from your perspective. Resubmissions are common, so keep that in mind. You can also get in touch with the program officer if you have questions about how to interpret the review material, or you have other questions about the feedback you've received. I would say, please, do your best to not get discouraged. Declines happen to everyone. Pay attention to the reviews, read them several times, and do your best to identify where are the common themes, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, what can be clarified. What are the major strengths and weaknesses that came across through the reviews? It's not useful to fixate on specific cranky comments or, a reviewer who seems cranky. That is highly unlikely to be the reason the proposal was declined. But in aggregate, if there are themes in those reviews that are cross reviews, especially if they're highlighted in a panel summary after those panelists have read the review, it's something to think about. It can be very helpful to have a friend or a colleague you trust to read the reviews objectively and tell you what they think. And again, feel free to contact a program officer if you have questions once you've gone through this process. On the other side, we're super happy every time we can tell a PI, especially a new PI, that they are going to be recommended for an award. We're really happy to do that. I would say it's also useful to read the reviews and panel summary if you've been notified that you're going to have an award, because they will have some useful criticisms. They will have some comments that you might take into account to make a stronger project. Another thing we ask is to be sure to cite the award and cite NSF when you publish or you do a conference presentation. Put that NSF note logo and include us in your acknowledgements. That's very helpful for us. Make sure that you are aware of what's required with respect to annual reporting or any data management requirements that are coming out of your program. Keep in touch with your program officer. This is important, through annual reports in particular. But if you have exciting results coming out, we'd like to hear about that so we can send it up the chain and make sure everyone at NSF knows about the great work you're doing. That can be very handy for us. And, finally, be a good mentor to the students and colleagues you support. I would also say that even those that are awarded, especially in the last few years, it's important to keep in touch because you may encounter some problems with your project. Delays, we're still coming out of a pandemic. If there are things that are happening that are delaying or preventing you from conducting the work as expected, keep in touch with us. There may be situations where we need some more formal notification, but even informally, we need to know. There's a section in your annual report for that. If it's something that you think we need to know about before the end of that year, you can submit interim reports and we will see them. And just finally, a reminder that you can sign up for division and office newsletters on our website. Encourage you to do that. You'll see when new solicitations come out. And if you have any other questions following today's session, please feel free to send me an email. I'm afraid I probably won't get to all of your questions, but I'm at csuchman@nsf.gov. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Cynthia. We appreciate that presentation. There was a lot to hear and learn from. We have a couple questions in the Q&A right now, and I encourage everyone to please continue to submit questions. So the first question, Cynthia, can you expand on working in developing countries as a broader impact? Does NSF fund work in developing countries?
So the broad answer is it depends on the program. And so I encourage you to contact your program officer to ask specific questions. There are certain requirements that need to be filled before we can make any awards at NSF in general to international participants. There are programs that do that routinely. I'm involved in the DISIS program, or Dynamics of Integrated Socio-Environmental Systems. So that one is one that does. Some others do not support international entities directly. However, if you want to travel and do work overseas, so long as that is well justified as a unique question that you're answering or that requires you to be in that place, then commonly the answer would be yes, but it would be only on the US side. If you want to have in-country help, you would need to talk to your program officer and understand that program's practice.
Okay, more questions about that? Could you give a few examples of allowable expenses for international collaborators within the context of broader impacts activities? You noted enhancing infrastructure in developing countries as a possible broader impact. Can you give examples of what budget items might be available or allowable, for this?
So I don't know about enhancing infrastructure, but I think that that international collaborations for sure are a broader impact. This is a definite situation where you would want to contact the program you're targeting and understand what their practice is. My home program in biological oceanography, it would really depend. A developing country, we might consider supporting an international collaborator, but we would need to pre-approve that. But we would not, and this is just an example, we would not support travel or participation from non-developing countries, for international participants from non-developing countries, they would be expected to bring their own resources to the table, which isn't to say we don't encourage that collaboration. So the specifics really matter here. So it's very hard for me to answer that question generally.
Yes. Okay. Does NSF GEO fund research relating to solar geoengineering and its governance?
Oh, that's one where I would say hold this space. I unfortunately, that is not my specific field, but there is a lot of interest in general in climate mitigation efforts. I cannot tell you of any specific program right now, but I think that I could direct you to talk to the folks in the TIP Directorate, for example, or the Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate, I'm sure are thinking along these lines. And I know that Geosciences is very interested in thinking about how to participate in kind of more of a climate science arena, but there's nothing specific that I know of, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist at this moment. But keep an eye out is all I can say.
Okay, I'm going to pull some other questions. Talking about rapid proposals in GEO, what are the key elements of a strong rapid proposal? For example, collecting topographic data before and after a hurricane?
Great question. I didn't cover rapids and eagers. So if you look at the proposal guide, those are two types of proposals at NSF that most of the time are only reviewed internally. So the key elements for a rapid, again, this is another situation where reaching out to the specific program is going to be really important. In my program, the rapid aspect would be, and this is laid out in the proposal guide, unexpected event. We would not consider a rapid a use of, although other programs may be different, a use of a ship platform necessarily. That could be part of it, but it wouldn't be the primary justification. For proposals that follow, say, a hurricane event, the key things we'd be looking for is, can you answer the questions you're posing? Meaning, do you potentially have data beforehand, which I think was part of this question. And then the answer to the question you're trying to address with this rapid requires you to get out immediately. And will that particular research add to the broader understanding in the field versus continuing monitoring efforts, for example? I'm speaking very specifically about my program here. So you need to make the case that you're going to advance fundamental understanding and that the work can be placed in that broader context, and that it is inappropriate to go out for review. If you don't need to be in the field within the next 6 to 8 months, it's going to be hard to make the case that you can't submit a proposal for review. And in my case, because my program doesn't have any deadlines. But in the case of a rapid, and these are awards that are up to 1 year and up to $200,000, you'll want to contact the specific program. We also like to understand sometimes how this work might lead to a future proposal.
Okay. Let's give you another one. Does the division in GEO have funding opportunities for climate change impacts and community intersections?
Oh, great question. So that's a broad question. And I think that's a two-pronged question. There are a lot of places to embed climate change research in GEO programs, would be my general answer to that. And the way that I think about that in my own program is as a broader impact, absolutely, you can do that right now. If you want to work more at the interface of natural and social sciences, you could take a look at the DISIS program, which would probably do that more directly, which again is Dynamics of Integrated Socio-Environmental Systems program, or programs like the Navigating the New Arctic or Coastlines and People, which both have GEO participation. We also have a bunch of that going on as part of the long-term ecological research program, which is another cross-directorate NSF program. So from a GEO perspective, I think it's embedded so deeply in so many of our programs at different levels. I'm not sure I'm answering your question because I can't pull out of the hat a specific program that is targeted on that because it seems to be everywhere.
Okay. All right, let's give you another one. Okay, can you talk about becoming a reviewer? Like, what is the kind of importance of the role of talk about being a reviewer and how can I become one?
Thank you for asking that question. I'm sorry that I didn't cover that in my talk. So the greater we really, really want to hear from people who would like to review. So the best thing to do if you want to become a reviewer, and this is typically something that happens about at the postdoctoral level, send an email to the program that you think is the best fit for you that you want to serve in. That'll depend. Include a 2-page CV or a CV and volunteer. We like that. Once you've got some ad hoc review experience under your belt, volunteer to be a panelist, which is an excellent way to understand our process a little better. It can be very, very helpful for early career scientists who've written a few reviews to serve on a panel. It'll give you some new insights and things to think about when you're writing your own proposals. And it's also just really interesting in terms of understanding and learning about what's going on in the field and what your colleagues are thinking about. And then if you really like panel service, and this is not the question at all, but we also at NSF have a program called Intergovernmental Personnel Act, which brings a bunch of rotational science expertise into our programs. My program has 2 rotators at any given time, and you can spend 1 to 3 years working at NSF and working as a program director. And that's really how you learn, how do we build portfolio balance? How do we make recommendation decisions, which is very complicated and what we spend a lot of our time doing once the review process is complete, which I also didn't cover. But if you take a look at the merit review process, webinars, when those become available, I think that we go into a lot more detail about that. So volunteer and send an email with your CV and volunteer is the answer to that question.
And can you tell me if I'm, say I'm in engineering and I've been doing research in geophysics, like, do I have to be in a certain area, in a field in order to be a reviewer? Or can I be a reviewer, apply, request to become a reviewer outside of my field?
You can, so long as you're working in that field or have subject matter expertise related to it. In my own field in oceanography, we have a lot of people with engineering backgrounds who are doing fluid dynamics work, for example. We have people who are trained as biologists who review for oceanography because they work in marine systems. Yes.
Okay. And are there funding programs for early career researchers that fall outside of the postdoctoral fellowships and faculty programs like career?
There is in Geosciences, postdoctoral fellowships and careers. I don't know of. The Biological Sciences Director has a new one that is sort of a research initiation program that I don't believe is mimicked right now in GEO. But I will say that we do pay attention to career stage in our portfolio balance. So if you write a proposal to a core research program that reviews well, there will be attention paid to career stage. So I wouldn't shy away once you are eligible at your institution to writing proposals and to start doing that into the core programs. A good way to get started is to send if you're thinking about submitting a proposal, get in touch with the program officer, send them a 2-page summary of what you're thinking about or 1-page summary and say, does this fit in your program? And I know I personally, at that stage, if it's a first time PI, will volunteer to have a conversation and explain our review process so that you understand who your audience is for your proposal. And I encourage you to do that too. So I don't think so. I could be wrong, but that doesn't preclude you from submitting a proposal to a regular core program or any of our other programs.
Okay, and back to reviewer. If I'm interested in becoming a reviewer, do I have to be affiliated with a U.S. institution?
No, we use international reviewers routinely.
Okay, and can you talk a bit about REU, research experiences for undergraduates, and how interdisciplinary GEO programs might work?
Wait, can you say that? Can you repeat that again? I missed
yes.
the second.
Can you talk about REU, research experiences for undergraduates, and how interdisciplinary GEO programs might work? Interdisciplinary GEO bio programs might work. Connecting GEO with REU.
Yeah. So the first half, there are different ways to have funding for REU students. You can either do it through a large award that for an REU site or REU supplements to existing awards. And we do encourage those REU supplements to be included in your proposal unless something new has come up and since you've gotten your award. So that's the first part of the question. And I'm not sure I really understand the second, except in the context of interdisciplinary research in general across bio and geo.
Yes.
And one thing I'll say is that for supplemental support, many cross NSF programs don't have funds for supplements in general. And so supplemental funds would need to come out of core programs. So if you have, I'm thinking about kind of cross directorate activities, and I'll go back to the DICES program, which I keep mentioning because I'm involved with it, the dynamics of integrated socio-environmental systems. If you wanted supplemental support for those awards, that program doesn't typically provide it. You would need to go to the managing program officer and find out, and the answer is usually no. However, there are programs that cross geo and bio, like the long-term ecological research program, which I'm also involved with, that will that embed REU supplements into the award. In those projects, there are sometimes other kinds of supplemental activities that are allowed. But that's not answering the question. I'm not quite sure I understand it, except that REU supplements generally are housed within core programs, and you would have to somehow talk to the managing program officer, but there may not be funds available for cross-directorate supplements.
I think that gets to what the general question was, bringing the two together, and you did that. So thank you. Can you talk about what sort of items you support in your instrumentation or facilities grants? Anything with geo and instrumentation?
Ooh, so that's really broad. I would contact the specific program directly. So for ocean sciences, which this question may not have come in relation to, there is ship support and there are instrument support components. There's actually a solicitation for instrument support to go on the ships. There is also a program to develop new instrumentation in ocean sciences, which is the OTIC program, and there's a program officer there. So it sort of depends on whether you're talking about purchasing instrumentation, developing new instruments, or shared use instrumentation. And all of those components are probably covered in all of the divisions in the facilities groups. And you might need to contact and ask, depending on what your specific question is and your specific person, what opportunities are available. But there are solicitations that outline within the specific divisions when and what kind and of these sorts of things there are funds for.
We don't have, if anyone has any more questions, please go ahead and submit them. In the meantime, Cynthia, can you just give us an overall takeaway from this? What is, you talked about becoming a reviewer, you talked about, look forward to put in your proposal, the kinds of things you want to think about. Is there an overall, do you want to just summarize, give us an overall takeaway with this?
Well, I think the overall takeaway in general is that if you're thinking about an NSF program or an NSF proposal, and you have any questions whatsoever about whether where it fits, or once you've gone through all the materials that are available online, whether the PAPG, the solicitation, reach out to the individual program and ask the question. That can happen before, if you've been declined or awarded, if you have questions after. No individual program at NSF is going to be exactly the same as another one in the way that we operate. And so ask the question is the take home.
Okay. I do thank you so much. You have NSF at your hands. You also have your sponsored projects office also there. Great resources there as well. So we encourage you to reach out to all of us, right? In-house and within NSF. So I do thank you very much for joining us today. Again, thank you so much for participating. Enjoy the rest of the day.